Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Career Tea. I'm your host, Sohrab, and today we have an awesome guest joining us, someone whose work revolves around research, education, and user experience. Her name is Jane Lurie, and she's got a fascinating path from studying child development and cognitive studies at Vanderbilt to driving research for companies like OK Play, Age of Learning, and Scholastic. We'll learn about her journey, the challenges she's faced, and how she's shaping the future of educational products. Jane, welcome to Career Tea. Happy New Year, and how are you feeling today?
Thanks. That was quite the introduction. I'm good. Happy to be here.
Of course. And so I'm really excited to dive into your story, very unique path you have. So let's jump right in. Let's start by talking about your studies at Vanderbilt University. You majored in child development and cognitive studies with a minor in business. That's quite a unique combination. So I want to understand what sparked your interest in those fields and how did they come together for you, especially the minor with business?
Yeah, when I went to Vanderbilt, one of the main reasons I wanted to go there was because there was a school of education. So Peabody is the school of education at Vanderbilt. And that's not something that's super common in colleges. There's often, an education major sometimes that's really focused on teaching, but there wasn't always something that had multiple options in the field of education. So that was a primary reason why I went to Vanderbilt in the first place, because I kind of always knew I wanted to do something in the kids space, but not necessarily teaching. So I would say out of all of those three, the child development piece came first. That was what I went into Vanderbilt knowing I wanted to do. And that stayed consistent. And I loved those classes. And interestingly, as I took some of those classes, I noticed there was a lot of parallels between child development and the cognitive studies major. A lot of overlap in some of the classes. So it wasn't, too difficult to combine the two. And I would say child development was a very kid-focused, learning about the different stages from, infancy to adolescence. And cognitive studies was more focused on kind of a combination of psychology and a little bit of neuro, but, some were focused on education, some weren't. So I thought those were really interesting to pair together, and they paired well both in the same school. So that was nice. And then as I was going through my 4 years there, I ended up very luckily with some space in my schedule. I was lucky to go in with some AP credit, so I didn't have to take a lot of the typical, core classes that you have to take. So I was looking for something to add. And at first I was debating doing something that was maybe just fun or interesting, but Vandy had recently added a business minor, and I just knew how helpful that could be in anything that I decided to do. And it was totally out of my wheelhouse. I had never taken an econ class before, but I really saw it as something that would be additive to my resume no matter where I went. And I really enjoyed it. I took some really interesting classes, and it just was nice to do something different, but something that was still really useful moving forward.
Yeah, I hear you. And did you have any other like family members that kind of studied or had a career in the same majors? Or, how did you like go from high school, like deciding your major? You're like, I want to go, study child development and cognitive studies.
Yeah, no. So no one in my family is really in education. I was always like working with kids in high school. I was always a babysitter, a tutor, a camp counselor. That was always something that I loved to do. I was always the one playing with, my little cousins and things like that. And so I started, early on seeking out those opportunities. I don't think on purpose, but then when I, reflected on my career so far and the choices I've made, it all really lines up and makes sense, which is interesting because I didn't necessarily do it purposefully that way. So where the child development came in, I didn't necessarily know it was going to be that, early on, but I think somewhat early on, even in like high school, moving into the space of doing something with kids was always kind of in the back of my mind.
Yeah, makes sense. And while we're on the topic of kind of what inspired you to study what you went into in college, I want to ask a quick question about your childhood. do you have or did you have a favorite toy or a game or activity that might have primed you for, your career in developing products and research for kids? Something like, let's say, Legos, leading to research type of scenario.
Really good question. I don't think there's like one thing specifically that I can pinpoint, like this was the best product that I had as a kid. But I was always like, I loved toys as a kid. Like going to Toys R Us was my favorite activity. I was a big fan of, playing with things. I did a lot of, I think, as a child, like pretend play, which I think can spark a lot of creativity. And now thinking about it, I actually did have like a pretend teacher set that I used to play with, and I would make my little brother sit there and pretend he was in school. So interestingly, I do think that aligns really well, but I was always playing. And I also always really loved watching TV in general, still do. But so I think weirdly, all of that kind of aligns to where I ended up. So when I started seeing this field of kids media emerging, it was like, oh, that makes total sense for what I'm going to do.
Yeah, makes sense. And while you're in school taking the classes you're taking, did you have a certain class, maybe it was your favorite class, but a moment that kind of made you realize you wanted to focus more on user design research and education?
Yes. So one of the first classes you take as a child development major is developmental psychology. It's kind of the first entrance into the major. Everyone takes it. It's a really fun class where you learn about the stages of development. And I had an amazing professor, Dr. Trosseth, and I remembered in one of our last classes towards the end of the semester, she said that she had an opening as a research assistant in her lab. And you often don't start research when you're a freshman. That's not necessarily something that people do. But I was interested and I was like, okay, I'll look into it. I'll see what it's about. And her lab, really interestingly, started as a symbolic development lab. So like, how do kids see symbols? How do they interpret symbols? And that turned into how do kids see and interpret media. I interviewed for the lab, I got the role, and it was really there that I started to see this area of children's media research. I didn't really know about it before that experience, but the research we were doing was so interesting to me. We were working with an ebook and watching how kids and parents interacted with the ebook. I ended up writing an honors thesis about that research. And I think it was from those experiences there that I really started to see this is something I could do long term.
Yeah, makes sense. And question about like your research, when you say you were part of this research, was that, I guess, equivalent to like an internship? Or did you also have to do internships on the side?
So this was something that I kind of did as a class. So I got credit hours for being a part of the lab. I did it from the end of my freshman year all the way through senior year. And by the time I was a senior, I was also a lab coordinator. So it was kind of like a job too. I worked on it over the summer also while I had other internships. So it was honestly a really big part of my college experience, probably the thing that I spent the most time doing.
Makes sense. So one of your first experiences was at OK Play as a play testing researcher. Can you tell us a little bit about that role, especially, leading weekly play testing sessions with parents and kids over Zoom? How was that like? What was that experience like?
It was so fun. That was really I had done a lot of more academic focused research, and that was really my first entrance into the world of more like UX, UI research, design research. And OK Play was a startup led, and I knew one of the founders of it. Her name is Dr. Colleen Russo Johnson, and she actually had worked in my research lab at Vanderbilt before my time, but I was introduced to her through that. And it was a really great app, and it was so much fun to work on, especially as a startup. I was, doing research sessions with kids, showing them things online, seeing their reactions, asking them some questions. And then I would take all of that and present it to, everyone else working there. And because it was a startup, that would be someone from marketing, art, design, all of those different aspects. So I think that really taught me how to communicate with all of those different people because, what sounds like one piece of feedback to me can mean something different to someone who's working on the marketing of the product versus someone who's changing the art design. So that was really fun. And then I also just always love getting to talk to kids and parents and watching them play the games and see their reactions. Zoom interviews can be tricky when you're working with kids as young as 5, but also really fun.
I was gonna say, was it purposefully over Zoom for the purpose of like have it be online, or was this during COVID time that needed to be over Zoom?
So yeah, this was COVID, so it needed to be over Zoom. But I will say with that caveat, in the years, I guess, kind of post-COVID now, we're still doing, and not at a different company, but still doing most research over Zoom. It's more convenient for people. They don't have to go into an office or take time out of their day to go somewhere. But you can also cover larger demographics, get people from across the country who wouldn't be able to necessarily come in to meet with you. So I think that's definitely a trend that's lasted past COVID too.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, COVID definitely changed a lot of things. So it was nice that you guys were able to adapt, because that type of research seems like, I feel like at first it probably was like a big question, like how can we do it? But it seems like you guys did it well. While we're on the topic of OK Play, did you ever got a, completely unexpected or, funny reaction from a child tester, something that caught your attention or caught you off guard, but could have ultimately helped shape the product?
I think everything kids say, you never know what's going to come out of their mouth, but it's always impacts what we do because they're the most honest. They'll really tell you how they feel. I would say even not just specifically at OK Play, but in all of my experiences doing remote interviews or play testing with kids, they often like to mute you or turn the sound off on their computer. That they're sneaky and they know what they're doing. Be like, I can't hear you anymore, but they've just turned off their sound. So there's always funny things like that happens, or, they'll get up to go get a snack in the middle of a session, but you just have to roll with the punches when working with kids, and it's really fun.
And the parents are present during these research?
Yeah.
But
So
they're not are they supposed to interject if like they're messing with the device or whatnot, or no, they're supposed to let it be?
it depends on what we're doing. A lot of the times we do ask parents to kind of sit back and let the kids, take charge, because we want to see their reactions. You don't want, them being coached to say the right thing, because there often isn't a right thing. We really want to know what they see or what they think. But with some of the technical device stuff, we need a little parental help.
Makes sense. So after that, you moved on to become an associate researcher at Age of Learning, Inc. I want to know, what was that transition like from your first role to this one? And did you find yourself applying the same skills that you were using at OK Play, or did you need to kind of adapt to a new environment or new research methods? And kind of what was the difference between the two positions?
Yeah, so I'd say honestly, the biggest one was OK Play. I was part-time. And Age of Learning was actually my first full-time role in the industry. So obviously and it was right out of school. So that's just a big transition. It was also, OK Play was remote, but this was also a fully remote job. I never went into the office. So that also has effects on, starting your first job in a career, getting to know people online. I have loved remote work in general, but, it has its ups and downs. But in terms of what I was doing, it was fairly similar, which is really great because I could apply a lot of what I learned at OK Play at Age of Learning. I think the biggest difference in terms of the work was at Age of Learning, we had multiple products that we were working on at once. So it wasn't, I wasn't the only researcher doing one specific thing, testing one game. But, 1 week I could be working on a math product. The next week I could be working on a product for middle school, and really learning how to adapt to those different types of things, different types of conversations too. And then the other thing I would say at Age of Learning, when I joined, they were starting up some products that were schools facing. And I hadn't really done as much teacher and educator facing research, which I ended up doing a lot of, and kind of shifted me more into EdTech, which is kind of the space I've been in for the past couple of years too. And just learning all the ins and outs of the school systems and all of the people that play a role in that. And, you from administrators down to students, and getting all of their feedback and making sure we're covering all of that was really interesting, and something that I learned about and now obviously really value.
Yeah. are a lot of these like products that you guys worked on, are they, and maybe this is like a stupid question, but are they digital or are they physical products, or is it like a mixture of the two?
So I'm trying to think back. A lot of what I worked on were digital games. So, an app or a website, things like that. Now, sometimes what I work on is kind of, we call it blended. So print and digital. I'm getting ahead of myself, but Scholastic also has obviously a lot of print products too. So I've kind of dabbled into that world a bit more, but most of my experience has been in the digital world.
Got it. And since you mentioned Scholastic, currently you're at Scholastic working as a design researcher, right? Or first you are as a design researcher, and now you are as a user and design research manager.
Yes.
So I want to know both positions, what does the day-to-day look like in those roles? And, how was the transition from design researcher to now user design research manager?
Yeah, so you're catching me at an interesting time because this change happened fairly recently. But so I started at Scholastic a little over 2 years ago as a design researcher. I would say like day to day, it's not that dramatic of a change. I'm still doing a lot of the same types of things. So working on Scholastic also has many different products that we work on. So one day I could be talking to kids about a product that we're making. The next day I could be talking to administrators about what they look for, when they're purchasing a product. So it varies depending on the week. And then, so I'll plan the studies. I'm also talking to the product owners, the product designers, marketing, all the different people involved. So you can see there's a through line there through all the jobs that I've had, and figuring out what research we need to do. So are we at a stage of development where it makes sense to do research? How can the research inform where we're at in product development? So those conversations are always happening just throughout the week, making sure that we're doing what we need to do, conducting the sessions, and then doing all the synthesis. So tagging our transcripts and highlighting key insights and quotes, and then writing up reports and presenting. So in a week, I could be doing any of those given steps for the different projects that we're working on, and managing all of those things is definitely something that I've had to learn. If I need to get really into focus mode and do a lot of work on synthesis, maybe I can't have that meeting during those 2 hours and I need to block out some time. So that's a big thing. And then the transition. So recently I'm now doing all of the design research work for our division. So we're, still working out the kinks of all of that, but I'm definitely starting to try to think more strategically about the research that we do, and creating more of, I have to create the timeline and manage my time myself. I'm not working with another researcher as closely. So this is my kind of first time as a team of one to some degree. I'm still on a team. I have people that support me. I'm on a team with designers now, so I'm getting to also work more closely with them and see their process, which is also really helpful for the research process because I know where they're at, and I can also see the direct impact of the research and see what it's affecting in the product. So that's been a really cool part of this transition and moving to being more directly on the design team.
Yeah, wow, that makes sense, and that's very cool. And when you think back at like your experience at OK Play and Scholastic, which do you think has had like more impact on, I guess, your career? And I guess which one have you enjoyed more within those roles? I know the roles are different, and now at Scholastic you are managing more and you have way more on your plate. Mm-hmm. But at the time when you were in those roles, which one have you enjoyed more?
I can't say that I've enjoyed one or the other more. I have to say I think they've helped shape my career in different ways. OK Play was really the first time that I was able to do this type of research. So I think that will like forever hold a special place in my heart and in my career because, coming from doing more academic research, which is, a very different pace than industry facing research, and seeing my recommendation was directly inputted into this product change for the first time. That's something that I think really sparked a lot of what I sought out in my next roles. And now at Scholastic, I think I've just really loved the experience as a whole. And I think it's just growing. I've really felt like my career has grown from OK Play to Age of Learning to where I'm at now. Each has kind of been a perfect step to the next. So they're all special in different ways.
No, makes sense. So here's a fun question for you. If you could invite any two fictional characters from a children's show or a cartoon to test your products, who would you choose and why?
Interesting.
Could be to test your products, or if you could hang out with, I say test your products since I'm learning that you do a lot of product testing. So
Yeah. So I would say one, I think to hang out with or to test the product, honestly, was Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus. I loved those books and watched the show as a kid. And, she's a teacher. So I think we could get really great feedback from her. And she's always finding ways to make school and learning fun and interactive. And that's honestly directly what I'm always trying to do is make learning fun and playful and find ways to keep it interesting and engaging for kids. So I'd love to hang out with her and see the adventures she would take me on. But also, I think she would be the perfect tester. So that was a perfect question.
great answer. Great answer. My next question for you, from understanding your background and, telling me what you do on a day-to-day, you've mentioned collecting, I'm working with both qualitative and quantitative data from parents and kids. I want to understand what type of data are you collecting, both quantitative and qualitative, from these research, and kind of how do you balance the two, right? Because I guess for my understanding, it's kind of hard to understand what the quantitative data could be that you're gathering from these testings.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say primarily I have focused on qualitative data. So a lot of conversations with parents, with kids, with teachers, administrators, that can look very different. So it can be a very open-ended conversation. But it can also be, we want to test out this prototype of something that we're working on. So a lot of qualitative, and then the quantitative, I think, comes in with when we conduct surveys. So we're not really conducting surveys with kids, but primarily, especially at Scholastic, we send out surveys to educators. It can range in what it's about, but it's a way to get kind of quick feedback. You don't have to get someone on the phone to give you answers. And then you do get some numbers. So if we're asking, what do people prefer, this or that, then you get a larger pool too. So when we send out a survey, we can get hundreds of responses. When I talk to people, I'm typically talking to 10 people for a study. So I think picking the methodology is really dependent on what we're trying to do. Another thing I do a lot is workshops. So we'll get a group of 10 teachers on Zoom and conduct a design workshop with them. And that's a whole different type of qualitative data because they're also feeding off of each other and hearing what each other are saying. So it's all very dependent on the research question and the type of data that we're looking to get.
Makes sense. And you might not have an answer to this, or maybe it might take you a minute to think of it. But from these studies that you've done with teachers or parents or kids, has there been a moment where someone said something about the product that you are aha moment, oh wow, that kind of changed the direction of the product, or you guys were this is what we should do for the product, this is the direction we should go?
I think honestly, everything, any conversation I have, especially with educators, because that's most of what I've been doing recently, just understanding the education landscape these days has every time I talk to a teacher, I learn something new, and just things you don't think of. For example, there's needs for multiple languages in a classroom because there are, kids coming to the US and they don't all speak English. Thinking about accessibility for kids, just there's so many different nuances to being in the classroom that I think until you really get in depth with a teacher and you talk to them, I think all of those insights really impact what we do because, we're trying to make things engaging for kids, but also easy to use and engaging for teachers, the adults using the products to want to use them. So I think we're trying to make teachers and admins' lives easier with whatever we're creating. So really trying to listen to the classroom context and the educational context has been really informative, especially recently, given all the changes going on and post-COVID. And yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really cool that you guys kind of like interact with teachers too, because they're essentially the ones that are, going to be using the products in school, kind of teaching the kids. And while we're talking about the features and design of the products you guys work on, have you, I guess, seen or worked on a product where you are like, this is cool, like, why didn't we have it when we were kids? And like, you think it would have been very helpful if, when you were younger, if that was around?
Honestly, all of it, because we didn't have any of this when I
Mm-hmm.
was in school. Like when I was in school, I remember we had a typing program that
Mm-hmm.
taught us how to type on the computer, but we really didn't have much in terms of like digital products. I remember smart boards were like the new thing and people were excited about that. And some classrooms had them and some classrooms didn't. But we really didn't have a lot of digital products in elementary school or even really middle school and high school. So every product that I've gotten to work on, I'm just so curious, about the classroom and what that
Mm-hmm.
looks like today. And I'm lucky I've gotten to go see some of the products in classrooms, which have been so much fun. But
What are what are a few of these products that you're mentioning?
so, for example, I worked on a program at Age of Learning called My Reading Academy, and that was a reading app for kids. And I got to go into the classroom and watch a couple of pre-K classrooms use the product. And that was really fun. And you learn so much from being there. And you go to the classroom and you see kids fumbling with their headphones and not being able, and, clicking the buttons wrong. And just thinking about even like the motor skills of a 4-year-old is very different from how, even a 7-year-old can use a computer. So being there in person and getting to watch them do those things, it gives you a whole new perspective.
Yeah, of course. So throughout your career in the past 3, 4 years, from OK Play to Scholastic, what would you say was your biggest challenge career-wise, and what was your biggest milestone? Essentially, the two that have, shaped your career in child development, cognitive studies, and user experience.
Good question. I think the biggest challenge in general, just for me, I don't think it's a specific instance, but I think I'm often the youngest person in a room that I'm in. And I think, we talk about imposter syndrome a lot. And, when you're the youngest person, you want to show up and be the one that's talking and presenting well, but also it can be intimidating. So I think learning just how to handle myself in those situations and being present and not overthinking things, which I can tend to do, is just something that I'm constantly working on and trying to learn as I continue and grow and get more leadership and responsibility and roles, and being confident that, I got those roles for a reason. So I think that's just something that's consistently, just something to work towards and through. And a milestone, I think this recent switch to being a user and design research manager is a big one for me, because I'm really able to take full ownership of the research I'm doing, which can be scary at times, but also really exciting to be able to shape that in a way that, I want to, and being that voice of the customer in the rooms that I'm in. I'm really excited to see, where that takes me. And it's I'm on the start of that new journey, but trying to grow in that and into that is really exciting. And the other one I will say is completing my honors thesis at Vanderbilt. I know that's a little bit before my official career started, but that was something I worked on for 3+ years, and I presented it and defended it. And that was something, I wrote a 60+ page paper in college. So that was a big milestone in general.
Nice. And that was before all the AI and ChatGPT, so
Yes,
60 plus
it was all
pages.
me.
That's crazy. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Next, I want to ask about your advice for the younger generation. If someone, a student wants to kind of follow in a similar path, maybe they're studying psychology, child development, or cognitive science, and are kind of interested in user research or EdTech products, as you mentioned, what's your best advice for them? Any must-know tips or pitfalls to avoid potentially?
The first one I always say is networking. I think people say that in a lot of fields, but I think especially the people that I've met along the way have helped me immensely in my career. When I was a senior in college, I did a ton of informational interviews, and I still honestly do them today. Now I'm on both sides of it. So sometimes I'm talking to someone just getting started, and sometimes I'm still seeking advice from people who have more seasoned careers. And especially in children's media, I will say it's a very tight-knit community. A lot of people know people because I think we all really deeply care about what we're doing. So I would say talk to as many people as you can. My advice is always, when you're at the end of an informational interview, my last question is always, is there anyone else you think I can talk to? Because then you just get down such a great path of this person introduces you to this person who introduces you to this person. And then you just expand your network so widely. So networking, I think, is a huge one. I'm also a part of the Children's Media Association, which is a group that I know a lot of people in the industry have joined to meet other people and connect and network. So I think just meeting people and learning more about the industry that you want to be in. So for me, that was staying up to date on the trends in kids media and EdTech and constantly reading about things, getting to know what's going on because, those trends will apply to anywhere you end up. So I think staying up to date and then just looking for opportunities wherever you can, whether it's part-time or an internship, something that you think you might be interested in but haven't tried out yet. I think what helped me a lot was the practical experiences that I had in my undergrad experiences. So I would say always be on the lookout for ways you can, do a small project on something or be a part of something while you're in school too, because you never know what that next step might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're, talking about kind of advice for younger generation, the time that we're in now, technology is moving so fast. I just mentioned AI. So, maybe in the future, we would kind of move away from physical types of learning. Maybe not. But if you were in school now and you were to kind of be going down the same career path, but you had an option to maybe not minor in business, would you minor in anything else? Kind of, thinking about where the technology and AI world is leading to. And do you think that has an effect on, child study and the type of research that you do?
Yeah, big question. So addressing your first part, I think business was a really helpful minor just because it taught me a lot just about, also how the world works. Econ, I think really valuable life skills. If I were to, if there was something to add that was about, AI in general, I think I would absolutely recommend anyone learn about how AI works because that's the direction everything is going, not just in, UX or user research, but in the world. I've also always thought it would have been interesting to do some sort of computer science classes and know a bit more about, coding and how all of that works. Because again, it's all about, for me, communicating what I'm doing to engineers sometimes. And I don't always understand, how what I'm saying will affect the code that they're writing. So that's also a space that I think, if I had had the time, would have been really interesting to learn more about. When you talk about AI, I mean, so much is changing in education with kids on AI. That's a whole, can of worms to think about, especially when you think about older kids in AI in middle school and high school and how they're using it, but also thinking about how can we teach kids how to use AI? It's not going away. It's not disappearing. So what can we do from, an educational company standpoint to help kids learn how to use it in a productive way, but also help teachers teach it in a way? It's something that's so new and we're not necessarily taught about in school yet. So I think that's something that's on my mind in general about, how is this going to affect the education field in the long term? And then on the research side of things, also, how will it affect the work that we do? There's already, sites that you can go on that will, synthesize your research for you with AI. And how well does it do that? I think a lot of things that I'm hearing are the human in the loop. So keeping, some reliance on, the person that did the research, and having them say yes, this AI thing is good. No, this one isn't. And, having that perspective in there. but thinking about, how can that make my work more efficient? And where do I also still want to retain some of that ownership over the work that I'm doing?
Yeah, no, great answer. Crazy world. And God knows where it's going to go with AI technology, but we have to keep up with it. We have to, I guess, keep learning it. Before we wrap up, last two questions for you. One, I want to know, and maybe you have an answer off the top of your head. Is there a book that you would suggest to other people to read? I know it's the new year, so I like to get people's feedback of what they're reading. If you have a book to suggest for anybody that's going to be listening, for them to kind of read this year, maybe something that you read that helped you in your field, or it doesn't have to be in your field either. Could be a book that you enjoy and it's kind of helped you along the way.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have one of my favorite books sitting on my desk. I don't move it. So it's called Becoming Better Grown-Ups. It's by Brad Montague, and it's not specifically research focused, but it's all about communicating with kids and thinking about things from kids' perspectives. It's written in such an easy way. I know it looks like a really big book when I hold it up, but it's such a good read, really interesting, and just all about thinking, becoming better grown-ups for the kids today. And I really loved that message. So would definitely recommend.
Perfect. I'm going to check that book out. And the last question, do you have a motto or a guiding principle that sums up your journey so far, or a motto that you live by that you like to keep in the back of your head?
I wouldn't say necessarily a motto, but something that I'm always striving to do and I'm always thinking about is just being as empathetic as possible. I'm always working on creating and researching things for, kids, parents, educators. And I'm often the voice of them in the room when we're talking about a design or talking about a product. And I always want to be empathetic towards, the environments that they're in. And that also goes for when I'm in interviews or discussions or things like that with, participants, and really listening to what people are saying and feeling and thinking. And I think as a researcher, we need to be as empathetic as possible because, you really want to be that voice that is there for the customer.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Jane, thanks so much for joining me on Career Tea today. It's been fascinating and exciting to hear about how your background in child development and cognitive studies has led you to this unique career that you're in, doing research, and essentially helping the younger generation, shaping educational solutions for students and kids growing up. Hopefully, maybe, next year, in 2 years, we'll have you back on again and we can see how where you're at that point and get more stories from you.
Perfect. Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for this episode, guys. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe and comment. As you know, we're new and that will help us grow. And, if you have a suggestion of the type of field or a career that you like to hear about more, leave a comment down below. We'll check it out. And also share this episode with anybody that might be in the same field or in the same career path as Jane. And maybe they can take a few tips from her as well. Thanks for tuning in Career Tea, and we'll see you again next week.